We folded these deck boards right into the fascia at every board break. No separate fascia piece, no exposed end grains, just a clean, seamless finish. It's spreading fast across the industry, and here's exactly how we did it. For this particular install, we decided that it might look cool if we did some waterfall surface borders that went from the top of the deck and that cascaded down the side, and then our fascia pieces were able to butt into this. And then on the outside of the deck where the face is, we did a similar detail where the fascia board comes in, and instead of doing a glue up like you've seen on some of our other videos, we did the same waterfall effect, but just as an edge so that it looks like a factory edge. So that's what I'm gonna show you guys how to do and what we use to do it. You're gonna need a piece of decking to make a waterfall corner with. You're going to need to make a jig so that you have a place to run your router through. Besides that, you're gonna need some glue and maybe some activator to make things go quicker. You're also gonna need a heat gun to be able to fold the corner. And probably one of the shortcuts of this technique is have a router with a 2-inch V-groove bit. That's gonna be an important one. And a clamp. You may need a belt sander to sand things out as well. All right, so let's say you know the length that you need, but you actually have to make your part longer than that to accommodate for the fold. Like, let's say we need a 12-inch piece. We know that the deck board ends at 12 inches, like so, but we wanna fold the corner over. So what we have to do, if this is where we want the board to end, right there, then we have to create the V-notch like this, which means you're gonna make the board longer. So obviously the board has to be longer than 12 inches. It's gonna be closer to 13 inches. If that's the case, I like to make my board a little bit longer than that. And then what I do is I create my V-notch, I fold it, I make the corner like so. Then once that's done, I'll measure from this edge and I'll go, okay, so since I have a long enough board, then I'll go measure my 12-inch board and then make my cut. Give yourself 3 or 4 inches of extra space on whatever part you're making until you get comfortable making those pieces and remembering, okay, I gotta add an inch, I gotta add 1.5 inches. If you're only adding 1 inch, you're pushing your luck. So here's the jig. It's really simple. I had 2 rails that are about the same thickness as the decking material, but they are just a little bit thicker. If you make them the same thickness as this piece will be too thin right here. Then you have to have a way to keep it to the proper width. I just made it for one piece to fit, and you wanna have just a little bit of room to be able to slide this thing in and out. Sometimes we make them a little too tight. And then you also, when you install this onto your workpiece, you wanna make sure it's square. You'll take a square, as you're anchoring it down to your workstation, you wanna make sure that this thing is fairly square. And I just use some 1.5 inch screws here, and then some 2.5 inch screws up here to anchor this down. If you don't anchor this down when you're getting ready to create it, this can slide and it'll ruin your piece and look something like this. That's what happens when you don't clamp something down. It can vibrate and move on you, and then you got some really funky angles. So here's the part. I'm gonna go ahead and clamp it to the table. Let's just say this is where I want to create the groove. I would usually have this marked out, like that could be my center, or I could identify it on the left side or the right side, because obviously here's my V-notch. So now that I know where I want to create the V-notch in the decking, I'm gonna take my router. This router was set up for this thinner piece of material earlier. You can see there's about 1/8 inch of material left. That's what you wanna keep when you're routing this out. If you go any deeper than this, the piece can just get loose and fall apart and break. You don't want that. You really want this piece to stay connected for a really long time. So you gotta leave about 1/8 inch of play in the material. Don't cut deeper than that. You can see that this piece of material, it's also fascia, but it's thinner because we create this step effect on our fascia boards. And you can always check on a couple pieces of scrap to make sure that you have the proper depth set on the material. On this jig, it's hard to read, but I wrote flat side with a couple arrows, and that refers to the flat side of my router, so that there's no play or slop or wobble in this particular routing situation. I'm gonna run the flat side of the router right up against this rail, and that's gonna give me a nice straight cut. The piece stayed in nice, even though, you know, like I said, it's loose. It's kind of nice to be able to slide that out. And it's a pretty nice cut. That's a little bit more material probably left than I want, but it's not bad. So we'll go ahead and fold this and see what it looks like. So the next step is gonna be heating this. What I do is I heat the inside first, because you can get a little more aggressive with it, and try to heat the board through the back side. Then I flip it over and heat the top side, and this is the side you care about, the side that you want to look nice. So you don't wanna overheat this and blister the board. This heat gun is by Cobalt. I have it all the way up on 7, which is the hottest it'll get. And what I like to do is I might just hold it up like this and let gravity tell me when this thing is starting to get hot enough for it to fold. If you don't use enough heat, the material can turn white on the outside or it can break. You stretch it too much and it'll crack, so you don't want that to happen. Okay, it's starting to get pliable now. So what I'm gonna do, see this? Now I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna let the weight of the material tell me when it's gonna be ready to bend. And that looks pretty good. It's pretty loose right now, and we're gonna have to give it a little energy when we try to bend it. Okay, it's nice and hot, so this next step happens quickly. What you do is you take some glue, and I tried not to put it too close to the ends because there's a little bit of squeeze out, and I'll run kind of a circle like that, and then use a little bit of activator. Okay. And then you bring this back up. You can tell that it's already starting to turn white. So it only takes about 10 seconds. Now that fold is done, okay? And there's your finish. So you can also try to file these edges before you install. That side's not too bad. If you heat it up too hot, this can fold up, so you gotta be careful about that. And then you're always gonna get these little corners that rise up a little bit. So sometimes I will, depending on how this is being installed, I may just take a file and file that down a little bit. So we did leave a little bit extra material, and you can see by doing that, it gave it a little bit fatter curvature to the outside edge of this board. And that miter looks pretty good after filing. If I was using this as a folded corner, I would just put this side up, and that's a win. Now that this is made, if I needed this to be a certain length, I could still take it over to the chop saw and cut this into the length I need, whatever part I'm trying to create, or wherever I want my joint to hit or whatnot. And then also for your waterfall effect, just like we showed you upstairs, here's your surface border, and then it comes down into your fascia piece. This will need to either be cut to length pre-installation, or we can cut them after the fact as well. So we do a little bit of both depending on where we're at, how high we're off the ground, that kind of thing, and what we're trying to achieve. So let's say, now that this is done, I want to make this the end piece of my deck versus a corner or something like that. Let's just go with that. The way I would do this, if I want this to be my outside edge of a deck board, so the whole thing is finished, then I would take this on the table saw and I would rip this a little bit long, so about 1.1/8 inch, 1.16. I'll keep this a little bit long, and then I'll come over with a belt sander, I'll clamp it to the table, and I'll smooth it out, file it out, and then I can use this for the end grain of my detail. We've already made the one part, right? So now we're just gonna convert this into something else. So we know that this decking's about 1 inch thick. So I'm gonna make my cut line a little bit thicker than that. I'm gonna go 1.16 inch. We're gonna dial this down a little bit because we don't need the blade to be super tall. Okay, so there's your really trick end grain. I'm gonna go ahead and take a little bit more off of this. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and sand this from there. That looks pretty flat to me. So now I'll take my rasp and I'll detail the edge. This corner looks good. So this looks like a factory-made board with surface grain on the front and the side of the face. So it makes a really attractive look when you want to use it as a deck board for both ends without a miter. Like instead of mitering two boards together, you could butt joint this if you wanted to. All right, so you might be asking, okay, now that I have my part made, how do I install it? Well, we always start on the top. We want to make sure that this piece is snug to our frame, but we're gonna go ahead and we use stainless steel screws, and we're gonna put those every 12 inches or less on center on the top. And then in the face as well, you can kind of see some of the plugs that we have color matched here, 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 and here. So the face of this might get 4 screws, and it's extremely solid. Then we have our folded corner, and we don't put any screws anywhere near the corner of the waterfall edge. We come down like 2 inches, like so. And we come back a couple inches, because remember, the first inch of this is the folded miter. So you don't want to put anything through that. So we come down 2 inches so that we're an inch into the frame, and we're an inch back into this frame as well. So don't get them too close to the edge, or else you're not going to be putting it into anything solid, and it doesn't do you any good as far as the install goes. That's how you fasten the board in to this section, and then everything else just mates to it. Same concept here on this folded edge. The first one we're putting into the end grain right there. We're making sure that we're not crossing over into our screw holes that we have installed on our top piece, and then we do 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, like you can see here, 1 into the end grain and then 2 into the frame. The details that separate a good deck from a great one are usually something that most people never notice until it's missing. If you want to take it further, we've got a full video on how we handle all our fascia corners linked below.